Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. We've been getting a ton of messages from you all asking for a deep dive on indie game development.
Yeah, I've seen those too. Seems like a lot of you are really interested in how these games get made.
Well, ask and you shall receive, right?
Mm.
Today, we're going to be diving deep into the world of indie games, looking at what makes them tick, what challenges developers face, and how they find success.
It's a really fascinating corner of the gaming industry, isn't it? Full of creativity and innovation.
Absolutely, and it often stands in such stark contrast to the big budget games we see from those major studios. But it's easy to look at indie games and think, oh, it's just a small team having fun, making games.
Hmm.
And while that's definitely part of it, the reality, as we'll find out today, is a lot more complex.
Yeah, a lot more goes into it than you might expect.
Yeah, for sure. So where should we start? I mean, there's so much to cover.
Well, you know, every game, no matter how big or small, starts with an idea. But very quickly, it bumps into the reality of, well, money.
That's true. You can't make a game without funding, can you?
Not really. And that's one of the biggest hurdles for indie developers right off the bat.
Yeah.
Limited budgets, especially compared to those AAA studios with their, well, almost endless pockets.
Right. And I think one person who has been really upfront about this challenge is Rami Ismail, the co-founder of Lambier.
Oh, yeah. Romy doesn't hold back, does he?
Yeah.
He's been super vocal about the financial tightrope walk that's basically a constant for indie devs.
Totally. And one thing I remember him saying that really stuck with me was his advice about budgeting. It wasn't just about planning for the known costs. It was about what did he call them? The unknown unknowns.
Right. The stuff you don't even know you need to budget for until it hits you, like surprise localization needs or some unexpected legal issue, stuff that can just appear out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's not just about having enough to start building. It's about having a buffer for those curveballs that, well, you just know are going to come your way.
Exactly. And, speaking of starting up, how do indie devs even get that initial funding to get their project off the ground?
Well, that's where things get interesting, right? Because traditional funding avenues aren't always available to indie developers.
Right. So they've had to get creative. And one of the biggest game changers in recent years has been crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah. Kickstarter's been huge for indies. It's not just about raising money, is it? It's also about building a community around your game.
That's such a key point.
Mm-hmm.
You get people invested in your project early on. They're putting their money where their mouth is, which means they're going to be your biggest supporters and advocates as you go through development.
It's almost like a built-in fan base right from the start.
Absolutely. And that can be so valuable, especially when you're navigating the, well, often pretty brutal world of game marketing, which we'll get to later.
For sure. But before we jump ahead, let's stick with the development side for a bit. Once you have the funding, you got to actually, well, make the game. And that comes with a whole host of technical challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest ones, especially for smaller teams or even solo devs, is the sheer number of roles they have to fill. You're talking programming, design, art, sound.
And sometimes even marketing, all at the same time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a lot to handle for anyone, let alone a small team with limited resources.
That's where I think the story of Toby Fox and Undertale is just so inspiring, He pretty much made that whole game himself.
It's amazing, right? And the game was such a hit, it really resonated with people.
It did. And I think part of the reason for that was because he focused on what he could do really well, like the storytelling and the characters, and didn't try to overreach technically.
Yeah, Undertale wasn't pushing graphical boundaries or anything. He used Game Maker Studio, which has its own set of, well, limitations. But he worked within those constraints and created something truly special.
It's a great reminder that you don't always need the most cutting-edge tech to make a great game.
Exactly. It's about using what you have creatively and cleverly.
So for indie devs who are, juggling all these roles and trying to overcome technical challenges, how do they make sure they're not getting buried under a mountain of bugs and issues?
Well, this is where a process called iterative development comes in. It's all about building the game in small, manageable chunks and constantly testing and refining those chunks as you go.
Like build a level, test it, tweak it, and then move on to the next bit.
Exactly. And this often involves getting feedback from other devs, friends, or even releasing early access versions of the game to get player feedback.
Makes sense. You catch those problems early on before they snowball into something unmanageable.
Precisely. It's about being proactive and ensuring a more polished final product.
Okay, so we've covered funding and development, but then comes the, well, maybe even bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Getting your game noticed.
Yeah, discoverability is a huge hurdle for indie devs.
Hmm.
The market is just so saturated these days.
I mean, there are thousands of games released every year, right? How do you even stand out in all that noise?
It's tough. And you're not just competing against other indie games, you're also up against those big marketing machines of the AAA publishers.
Right. It's David versus Goliath.
In a lot of ways, it is.
And, this reminds me of Among Us. That game didn't become a hit overnight, did it?
Among Us is such an interesting case study, right? It was released in 2018 and, well, kind of just sat there for a while.
Yeah, it didn't really find its audience until 2020, right?
Yep. And it's a perfect example of how unpredictable game marketing can be. It wasn't a massive marketing campaign that made Among Us a hit. It was streamers on Twitch and YouTube picking it up and playing it with their audiences.
So it was more like organic word of mouth that led to its success.
Exactly. And while that's amazing when it happens, it's not something you really plan for or rely on.
Definitely not a sustainable strategy for most devs.
Agreed. So what can indie devs do proactively to build an audience and increase their chances of getting noticed?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Well, social media is absolutely crucial. Platforms like Twitter and Discord are essential for engaging with potential players, building a community, and generating hype for your game.
Like sharing behind the scenes peeks at development or interacting with fans directly.
Exactly. It's all about fostering a sense of excitement and community around your game.
Okay, so we've talked about budgeting, development, and marketing. Let's try to summarize some key takeaways for indie devs.
Sure, I think one of the biggest things is being smart with your money. Have a detailed budget and plan for those unexpected costs.
Right, and don't be afraid to explore alternative funding avenues like Kickstarter.
Totally. And when it comes to development, embrace that iterative process. Test early, test often, and incorporate feedback.
And build a strong community around your game using social media.
Couldn't agree more. And, something we haven't really touched on yet is networking. Connecting with other indie devs can be incredibly valuable.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, you can learn from their experiences, get feedback on your game, find potential collaborators. It's a whole support system of people who understand the unique challenges of indie development.
Makes sense. There's strength in numbers, right?
Absolutely.
Now, I know indie devs often have to get pretty creative with their marketing, especially with limited budgets. What are some of the more innovative approaches you've seen?
Well, one that comes to mind is guerrilla marketing. It's all about getting attention in unconventional ways, like hosting unique events or doing something really out there to generate buzz.
It's about making a big splash with limited resources.
Exactly. And another important thing to remember is that failure is part of the process. Not every game is going to be a hit.
That's true. It's all about learning from those setbacks and using them to improve.
And, a lot of successful games have actually come from previous failed projects. It's about iterating and refining your ideas over time.
It's like that saying, fail fast and fail often. Now, you mentioned some key figures and moments that have really shaped indie gaming. Who would you highlight?
Well, one of the most influential figures has to be Jonathan Blow, the creator of Braid.
Oh, yeah. Braid was groundbreaking.
It was. It showed that indie games could be just as artistic and thought-provoking as any AAA title.
And it really helped kickstart the modern indie game renaissance.
Absolutely. And another inspiring story is that of Eric Barone and Stardew Valley.
Oh man, Stardew Valley is a classic.
It is. And he developed that entire game by himself over 4 years.
4 years. Wow, that's dedication.
It really is. And it just goes to show what you can achieve with enough passion and perseverance.
It's amazing what one person can accomplish. Now, before we wrap up, you said you had a surprising fact about indie games.
Oh, yeah. I almost forgot. Did you know that Minecraft, one of the best-selling games of all time, started as an indie project?
Minecraft? Seriously, I had no idea.
Yep. It was created by Marcus Persson, also known as Notch, and it just exploded in popularity.
It's incredible to think that a game with such a massive impact originated as an indie project.
It really highlights the potential of indie games, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The next big thing could be brewing in someone's basement right now.
You never know. So, as we close out our deep dive, what are some final thoughts you'd leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that indie game development is challenging, but incredibly rewarding. It's a constant uphill battle, but the sense of accomplishment when you finally release your game into the world is unlike anything else.
And every obstacle you overcome along the way is an opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly. It forces you to be creative, resourceful, and resilient.
Well, this has been a fascinating exploration of the indie game world. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, I hope you've gained a deeper appreciation for the hard work and passion that goes into making these amazing games. And next time you play an indie game, take a moment to think about the journey it took to get to your screen.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Till next time.
See ya.